in Vancouver was the first city, and then I lived in Toronto for a couple of years too before I was becoming very conscious of the depth of American music and the sources of the American music that I was particularly drawn to had a history of being brought into the public view in communities like New York and Nashville and New Orleans and places like this in San Francisco and Austin, Texas, and Chicago. You know, I sort of, after kicking around Canada for a couple of years and sort of floundering, not really knowing what to do with myself other than play on the sidewalk and in doorways and on the subway platforms and the train stations and stuff like that, I was becoming conscious of Mississippi John Hurt and Hank Williams Sr. and Johnny Cash and all these guys, and they were singing about these towns, and I just felt like those towns are places I need to see, you know. And it was a natural, organic sort of wanting to get close to the source of the music. And after Vancouver and Toronto, I transitioned to New York City because by then I was aware of the folk revival of the 1960s and 70s, which gave us such amazing performers as, you know, Bob Dylan and John Baez. And, you know, there's a long list of people that came out of that scene that didn't get as famous as Bob, but there was a huge, it was like the beginnings of, well, it was one branch of the whole rock and roll family, really. You know, Chuck Berry and Little Richard and all that. That first phase of rock and roll had happened in the mid-50s and late 50s, and the next thing up was the folk revival, and that was very much happening in New York City and also Boston and places. And so my first stop after I left Canada was to go to New York and try and connect with whatever remnants there was of that community. And it took me several years to get my bearings in New York. It was a really, you know, it's a difficult place to survive, and I had no friends, and really started at street level there. And it was tough going, and I, you know, ended up living in very dangerous circumstances. I was a squatter, and it came to about the middle of the winter of '92, '93, and I was living in an abandoned building and freezing. And I thought, maybe I'm not ready for New York yet. And I started thinking about New Orleans and you know, the Big Easy and Mardi Gras happening in just a couple, you know, 6 weeks or something, you know, like in February at the time, right? You know, that was in midwinter, and I was thinking, wow, I could get out of here and go where the sun is shining and it's 80 degrees. And so, you know, that was the next town for me, New Orleans. And of course, that was really a shot in the arm in terms of like an education in music, because as soon as you get off the bus at the Greyhound station, you hear the jazz spilling out of someplace or other, and, you know, somebody that's schnockered at 10 in the morning, you know, stumbling down the sidewalk, and you're like, what kind of town is this? You know, still in their, you know, silk sharkskin suit or whatever, you know, like from dancing it up, you know, the night before.
Welcome to the Big Easy.
Yeah, and I made my way to the French Quarter and soon embarked on a journey of relationships and mentorships with older musicians who took an interest in cultivating my literacy, and they turned me onto records that, you know, I might have, you know, they turned me onto the essential American songbook of rhythm and blues, gospel, soul, ragtime, jazz, all the many incarnations of jazz, the Louis Jordan era of jazz and the big band stuff, and then, you know, I mean, the second line, which is a very New Orleans, you know, the parade and the jazz funerals. I just got a crash course in American musical forms while I was there, and that was a tremendous place to live.
Oh, I bet. You know, the thing, when people, I run into people that say, I don't like blues, or I don't like jazz, and I say, how can you say that? Because it's not a narrow thing. It's wide open. You know, it's like there's so many different avenues to explore. It's crazy.
Well, yeah, there's, I mean, blues is essentially, you know, an extension of a scale of music that came across the water from African tradition and found its way into the fields of the plantations and made its way into the juke joints and popular music, and then in the 1950s mixed, you know, with elements of rock and roll and hybridized into in a million different ways, into Motown and everything else, jazz. So just to say you don't like blues is really like kind of a contradictory statement. It's almost like saying you don't really like American music.
Yeah, period.
Because it's in everything. Really.
Totally agree there. Now, were you busking in New Orleans? Is that?
That's where I started, yes, when I first arrived there. I mean, that's how I was living. You know, but that's serious business in New Orleans, more than in a lot of other towns. You know, like you have to, I had a spot over by where that steam engine, the steamboat, with the big paddle wheel, you know, and the steam stack on the top of it. It has an organ playing when it pulls up to the, and it's loud. It's louder than an acoustic guitar, and a guy singing, you can really like wear yourself out trying to be loud, you know, to carry over that thing. So it was a natural time for any musician to take a break, and that's where the shift would change. And saxophone Tyrone would play the early shift, and I would show up at 11 in the morning, and when the calliope, the steam organ started playing, he'd pack up his stuff, and we'd hang for a few minutes, and then he'd split and come back at 2 o'clock the next time the calliope pulled up. So I'd play from 11 in the morning till 2, and work up a big crowd and place, and you know, some of the hits they expected to hear, Jambalaya, Crawfish Pie, and all that stuff. You know, great Hank Williams Sr. tune, and but then I'd slip in one of my originals because that's really where my heart was. I wanted
Right. Oh, sure.
Kind of stuff.
But you have to play the well-known songs, otherwise people will just lose interest.
It's the hook. That's how you get them to sit down and say, "Hey, this kid's all right. Let's hear what he's got."
Right.
And then you set yourself for an opportunity to really hit them with one of your tunes that blows them away, and then we've got a fan. You know, that's how.
Now, somebody that heard you busking, John Sinclair.
Yeah.
Now, is that the same John Sinclair that used to be with, or he wasn't a member, but he worked with MC5?
That is one and
It
the
is
same.
the same one?
John
Okay.
Sinclair,
I
John
wondered
Sinclair, it's not fair, John Sinclair. Same John Sinclair that the feds set up to procure 2 marijuana cigarettes for an undercover informant back in 1968 or 69, and was going to make an example out of him and send him away to prison for 10 years. And John Lennon and you know, a whole batch of the biggest stars of the day did the free John Sinclair concert. And John Lennon has a song about John Sinclair called, you know, John Sinclair, it's not fair, John Sinclair. But they eventually got him up, you know, in 72 they raised enough money to free John, and he became a radio personality and on WWOC, listener-sponsored radio in New Orleans. And John was gracious enough to invite me on to play a few tunes live.
Really?
You know, after my shift was relieved by my friend saxophone Tyrone, took over with his saxophone, and I packed up my guitar and walked over to the radio station and played a couple tunes and did a little bit of an interview with John. And I was packing up my guitar and getting ready to walk back out into the street and figure out what was next. And the phone rang in the studio, and John says, "Hold up, Mike, hold up." And he's talking to this guy, and he puts me on the phone with this guy. And he's a Nashville guy, publisher, who happened to be driving through New Orleans and caught my live songs, and he says, "What are you doing? What are you doing with your career?" And I was like, "Well, I did the 11 to 2 shift down at the boardwalk by the Calliope this morning, and I think I got enough here for a sandwich and a pack of cigarettes, you know." Probably something like that. You know, I like to make humor out of my situation. And, but at any rate,
Whether it's funny or not.
he happened to be a publisher and was in town, and although we didn't meet that day, we exchanged contact, and within 30 days he came back with a friend of his with and a full contract for a term of songwriting,
Wow.
which essentially leveled me up from being not only a street musician but somewhat of, I mean, I don't want to be stuck up and say that I'm not a street person anymore, because once you've been in the street, that stays with you. But basically, my life was so unstable and unsteady, and I had very little security at that time. From week to week, month to month, I never knew what was going to be the situation. And when this guy signed me up to a publishing deal, that chapter of my life kind of, I mean, I'm not saying it's all gravy now, but
No.
that living hand to mouth like that, like I was, that chapter came to an end. And then I moved to Nashville and started cutting demos.
In New Orleans, did you have an apartment?
Yeah, I had an apartment, and there was an enclave of musicians that all had apartments in this cluster of houses that were all dilapidated and run down over there on the edge of the French Quarter. And, we had a big time, lots of great cookouts, and everybody would scatter in the morning to their various spots in the French Quarter and along the river. And I was married down there to a great Delta blues slide guitar player. I learned a lot of guitar stuff from her. I learned how to dodge flying plates.
That can be important. So that's so it just happened because you were busking, and the right guy walked by, and it's like, oh.
That part, yeah, that was one of those just amazing moments where things just fall into place. And like I said, he started bringing me up to Nashville. We cut a couple of demos. He started pitching demos out to people in the business here, and in no time, somehow or other, it ended up in Rodney Crowell's possession, and he, on the stack of 100 other things that he had received to listen to from people who wanted to work with him that week, right? And by some fortuitous coincidence, he happened to play my demo, and I was really outside the box, I think, for Nashville songwriting submissions and things like this. I was really into the blues, and I was learning blue piano, and I was putting that stuff over top my rhythm guitar tracks, and then the rhythms that I was using were coming from the world of the syncopated rhythms of the blues rather than the straight rhythms of the country world. And he was intrigued by it and wanted to know more about where I was from and how I came to be there. And we struck up a friendship, and he ended up producing my first record, and that got me signed with this label out of Los Angeles. And I toured around the country and did pretty well, and had a few band shows, mostly solo. Toured around, did a huge radio promotion, and I think I charted, in AAA. And on that release, I got 2 songs up into the mid-20s national, which was pretty cool for a brand new artist that's fresh off of the streets. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was set up to really, have a great run with the second record, and this label from LA put me in the studio with Jim Dickinson, a producer, a legendary producer out of Memphis, who had just finished working on a Bob Dylan record. He just finished working with Bob, and he was available to work with me. And I met with him, and I only knew very little. I knew he had been the one that played piano on Good Morning America, How Are You, with Ella Carlo.
Right.
And he also he played the piano on Wild Horses with the Stones, and he produced some of that stuff. And that was about all I knew. And I met with him, and then he said, well, I'm going to get Lee Von Helm from the band, and my jaw just about dropped. And then I'm going to get Spooner Oldham, who played keys with Aretha on her first couple of records. And I was just stunned at this point. And I'm going to get David Hood, who played bass on When a Man Loves a Woman, with Percy Slade in 1964. And at this point, I was just like, this can't be real. And, it was real. And Jim Dickinson thought a lot of my songs, and thought that this was the band that he heard, bringing them to recorded life. And so we made a record. And I'm sorry to be long-winded. I should take a breath and let you ask a question. Maybe you have an angle that you want me to pay extra attention to. But you know, we made the record, and then everything sort of took a strange turn.
Right. Well, we talked about that a little bit last time when you were here. I guess it's like 21 minutes in. You want to hear a song, or?
Yeah, I'll play
a
a
song.
So this is a tune. This is actually the opening track on my record with all those guys that I just mentioned. This is called Together, and it's a song of love and hope for a troubled time and troubled plans. Let's take this here. Sisters, brothers, boys and girls, come on and dream about a different world. And together we will find a better way, where each and every person matters, and fancy clothes are dressed in tatters. And together we will find a better way. We got people cashing in on the times, people locked away for victimless crime, people losing touch with what's really real. And yes, I feel in my heart that it's time for us to make a brand new start. Together we got to find a better way. Some have mountains of silver and gold, and some they just get left out in the cold. But together we will find a better way. Tired world, sick with greed, got 6 billion hungry mouths to feed. And together we will find a better way. Confusion and anger on every side, it's getting to be there's no place to hide. It's gonna take a miracle to make it heal. And yes, I feel in my heart that it's time for us to make a brand new start. got to find a better way. All together, we got to find a better way.
Yeah, that's good stuff there. Mike Younger, live in the KMCN studio on Midwest Review Live. I gotta take a little break and we'll be right back with more from Mike Younger.
Have you been feeling an old or leaky roof? Enough is enough. Ryan Eisen's Roofing and Construction has over 25 years in the
So I don't think I'm gonna stay at this hotel this time, man. It was kind of sketchy the last time I stayed there.
Yeah.
Can you make a recommendation somewhere that the van might be safe with all of my gear in it? Because some guys recommended on the Illinois side of the river at the North Bridge. Do you know that hotel over there by the dispensary?
Hi, it's Sarah at Classic Body Works, Clinton's go-to full-service auto
That's a
body
good
shop.
spot.
We've
You know
been
the
family
hotel I'm
owned and
talking about?
operated for 40
Is it
years.
around kind
Our
of?
There's only
state-of-the-art
one motel
facility
in
and certified
Fulton.
technicians can repair all
Yeah,
makes and models.
it's a nice place,
From potholes
and
to parking lot mishaps, we
Fulton
don't
has
only
a
restore
little
your vehicle, but we
less
also restore your peace of mind.
characters
Stop
on
in today
it.
for a free
I
collision
mean, I could
estimate
drive
or
a little
call
way
to
if you
schedule
think
a
that
wheel alignment or
No,
oil change.
there's more hotels going east or no?
563-243-2688.
It's a long
Again,
stretch
that's
of no hotels, isn't it?
Yeah, there's not a whole
563-243-2688.
lot, unless you wanna go down to the Quad Cities.
I'm headed to Syracuse, New York.
I would say go to Fulton, not down south.
That's the North Bridge, on the, just on the other side.
Yeah, that's, I was gonna say out here, but that one's probably just as nice, just as good spot.
All this and more in store only at your Clinton IE. Weather's brought to you by Specialized Seal Coating in Fulton, the only locally owned and operated asphalt maintenance, hot tar, crack filling, and seal coating
this
business
place
that
over
can
here.
leave your driveway or parking lot back in black. Specialized Seal
When
Coating
you
in
sit
Fulton,
here at
your
all
job for
for any
spring
amount of
now.
time,
Find them on Facebook.
There's a
Here's
black
your
truck that
forecast
pulls
for the
in.
back 94.7 Wild Rose Casino Weather Center.
And all day
Mainly clear
long,
tonight with
there's
lows
cars
around
in and out,
63.
in and out,
Northeast
in and out.
winds around 5 miles per hour.
I don't
Mainly
know
sunny
what they're
skies and
selling,
cold
but
tomorrow.
it's
Chance for
gotta be
isolated
something.
thunderstorms. Highs level
And
off around
you
89.
just don't-
Chance for scattered
it's
thunderstorms
hard to
tomorrow
say,
night,
you know.
66. Chance for scattered storms
I didn't feel like it
Tuesday
was
and
a very
Wednesday,
secure
92.
place to stay.
Tuesday,
No, it's
95.
really not.
Wednesday. I'm weatherology meteorologist Paul Trombley.
And I'm Billy Rose. You're listening to Midwest Review on MAC FM 94.7. Good stuff from Mike Younger. Mike, we're talking to Mike, and he played the song. What was the name of that song?
That song's called Together.
Together, okay. That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure. It's not any better. Now, you have good, great, I would say, songwriting. I mean, I really like your songwriting, and like that song and other songs on that album. Now that's 20 years old, or 20 plus years old now, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't sound dated to me at all. There's another song on there, Laying Low, that was recorded in, what was it, 2001?
Yeah, that's right.
And to me, that doesn't sound dated at all, not at all. Can you talk a little bit about that song, maybe?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that one up, because when I was able to reclaim my tapes after 17 years, and I finally, we had to go through the processes of what they call in the recording business, you baking the tapes. This is basically if tapes have been sitting around, which they weren't just sitting around any old place. They were in a temperature and humidity-controlled vault in Memphis
That's
for
good.
17 years at this recording studio where it was made. I suspected, I didn't have any way of confirming that, but at any rate, when that studio was closing, I contacted people that were associated and reminded them that you might not remember me, but I recorded this session back in 2001, and I know that I'm pretty sure that my tapes are still in there, and I just read that the business is closing and you guys are moving and everything, and I wanted to see if there's any way. Most of the people that were involved in the project have passed away, and I would really like to put the record out and kind of settle up all the loose ends around the project. And I I was able to find a lady who was connected to the business, and she helped me. She remembered the session. She was there,
Cool.
and she knew exactly where my tapes were.
Really? Wow.
So I got them, and then there was the process of baking them, right, which is to remove any humidity that might have accumulated that would make the tape weak. And when you put it on the reel to reel and start fast forwarding and rewinding or playing it, it could stretch the tape and damage it in some way. You have to go through this process, and then you get it up on the reel to reel. You play the tapes, and you transfer all those files to digital. When you get that far, now you can put your digital files up on what's called a Pro Tools rig, and you can manipulate them from there and mix them, EQ them, add guitars, singers, horns, whatever, and we did those things over the next few years. But first, initially, was to get it to the Pro Tools to where we could listen down to it, and when we got to that stage, there was 2 songs on it that I was unhappy with my songwriting. The tracks that were laid by the band were fantastic, but the song that was there, I didn't feel was as strong as it could be, and especially this was like, I got the record back in 2017, so we're talking about like 2018 that I was thinking I can take the track that the band played, that's the bass player, the drummer, the keyboard players, and the guitar players all together, and I can write something within those chords that maybe even has a completely different melody than what was originally there, and just use the structure. And I started experimenting with it, and it took me quite some time but Laying Low is one of those songs. It's one of the songs that I reworked the vocals and the lyrical content to relate to what was happening in 2018, which, if you recall, was a pretty dark and difficult moment for a lot of people. And the song specifically is dealing with the demoralized nature of those people who have been fighting to preserve our natural world and natural resources against big polluters and moneyed interests that are running over our regulatory processes, etc. People who are trying to protect their waters from desecration, or not necessarily just outright pollution and toxification. Those people face an uphill battle because the interests that they're standing up to have very deep pockets and huge armies of lobbyists and stuff. And the world witnessed. The next generation, the young people, see that this problem of climate change and our consumption of fossil fuels is we're not getting our arms around it. We've been talking about it for 50 years, and the world is going over the cliff, and they're coming of age. They're 18, 19, 20, 21, young adult minds, and they're looking up and like, wait, what? They've known for 2 generations that this is happening, and they haven't taken. And there's, so there's a fair amount of, mental health issues that are, coming out in the young kids, and there's also a real steely determination, like that the young European girl Greta Thunberg has shown under fire and under duress. The oil and gas people who, I know there's a lot of good blue-collar, working-class people working out there in the oil and gas business. It's not, I don't have any ill will towards them. I want them to find a place in the economy that is comfortable to them. But my beef is with the tycoons in the oil and gas business who refuse to relinquish any of their market share and make room for clean energy, to gradually start, getting some of the oil and gas business gets a lot of public subsidies, so it seems like clean energy ought to as well, but I know that that's just not how things work. And at any rate, Laying Low is my effort to extend a hand to young people as to prevent them from disengaging out of disgust. The process, the very slow and painstaking process by generations, progress by inches over generations to deal with these problems. It's very difficult and requires a lot of patience, and some people won't live to see these changes, but they have put their lives into it anyways, and the young folks, we're all counting on them to show up as reinforcements and to take the torch. I consider myself part of the younger generation still, although I'm getting on. I've been at it for a long time, and the song "Laying Low" is sort of an olive branch to the young people to stay with me. If you wouldn't mind, I'd love to play and
Oh, yeah.
strum on that one.
Please.
Come on, baby, don't hang your head so low. The road is long and you still got a ways to go. So spin the dial on your dashboard radio. If you can't find the words, come on, baby, don't turn your face away. The road is long and you still got a lot to say. We need to hear your voice more than ever today. Won't you make yourself heard? Cities burning on the hillside, angry seas they begin to rise. Gotta fly above the smoke to see through the light. But this ain't no time for laying low and letting things slide. We're running back home for a place to hide. I need you by my side, baby, yes I do. It's always somebody else's problem. That's how we got here. Disposable nations, civilizations with garbage piling up to our ears. Come on, baby, don't walk away just yet. There ain't no telling how dark this night could get. We're gonna find out what we don't know about the point of no return. Fish are floating in the harbor, withered crops they waste in the fields. Anyone with any sense will take to their heels. But this ain't no time for laying low and letting things slide. For running back home for a place to hide. I need you by my side. Oh, baby, please don't go. Letting things slide. Running back home for a place to hide. I need you by my side.
Oh, yeah. Mike Younger. Name of the song, Laying Low. Good stuff, Mike. I really like your writing. I like your writing, period. So.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah. That's good stuff. You know, I'm 66 now. I figure I got maybe 10, 15 years left. But what I worry about is the world my grandkids are going to grow up in. I think, oh, man, it's scary. really is.
I think that everybody has young people in their lives that should be their inspiration to do everything they can do.
Yeah.
And it's really a generational moment like that is coming. It is here, really. You know, it's like when war broke out in after Pearl Harbor, this country mobilized very quickly to confront the danger and to prevent what was happening in Europe from coming here. And that was a 5-alarm fire, and this is a 5-alarm fire, and we need to really respond accordingly. Otherwise, I mean, the world that we leave for these young people is going to be less than we ourselves had. And the golden rule is to leave the place better than it was when you got there. And I think that as a species, we really need to do everything we can, which means each person has to do their part.
Yeah, very true. Do you happen to know Dave Huckfeld?
His name's familiar, but I can't put a face with the name.
He's from Iowa originally. He lives in Minneapolis now. But he's done a few concerts, one for Standing Rock when that was going on.
Oh, yeah.
And another one he did more recently for water. I can't remember the name of it. Something for clean water.
Water is life.
Yes, that's it. Yeah. Him, Keith Sikola, Annie Humphreys, they're all people that I play on the show. And yeah, I think you would get along great with them.
Well, you know, I'm going to have to make myself familiar with their work.
Yeah, oh, for sure, yeah. They're, Annie and Keith are both Native Americans, and Dave runs in that area a lot. He's not a Native American, but yeah, very, very conscientious person. Yeah, I think you'd fit right in.
Well, we could reminisce about our days at Standing Rock, because I spent
Did you?
I spent 10 days out there in camp as well,
Yeah.
bringing aid and comfort from the people in Tennessee in solidarity with another embattled community facing pipeline infrastructure expansion in this late hour.
Right, yeah, for sure. Wow. Yeah. Let's see, what else I got written down here we can talk about. One thing I was thinking, now you play pretty much coast to coast now, right?
I'm getting to where I've got circuits in almost every region. I mean, I've got friends out in Nebraska and Oklahoma that have been trying to get me to come out there, and I'm really just starting to work on that part of the country. But I mean, Pacific Northwest, I've got some stuff going on late in the year in November, and I've got some Southwest stuff in Arizona. I'm hoping to build it into a bit of a California run as well. In October, going up the East Coast from here, and I just got a call to do a disaster relief thing in Vermont, and I'm going to be going up and playing some shows up in Massachusetts and Maine. So I'm trying to get out there as best I can and build up my business life to where I can sort of get to where I'm not devoting or splitting my energy 50-50 with all this administrative stuff, and get back to just like focusing on the creative and finishing the writing for the next album, start getting into the studio, get the next album ready. And that is a difficult and a tall order if you are daily spending 4 to 6 hours on bookings and booking pitches and graphic design and updates on your social media content and website and blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah.
Right.
So, as an independent artist, figuring out how to do it all is tough, and there are real serious limitations, which, like a whole floor of staff, a department that was devoted to radio promotion, another to publicity, another to bookings and tour support. This is how the industry used to work, and that structure doesn't exist for a lot of us anymore. So we have to do all of it, and on top of that, be a travel agent. By the way, Bill, can you recommend a hotel here in town? Because the one I stayed at last time was a little sketchy.
Yeah, for sure. I know exactly what you're. I forgot what I was going to say, but one thing.
Excuse me.
Have you played any? I'm sure you played numerous old places that have a lot of history to them.
My favorite types of places.
When you're up there on stage, do you think about or do you feel the legends that have played be there before you? Or?
I try not to think about that because, you know, I can, you know, confidence is a very delicate thing, you know, like, you know, walking into a town where you know maybe half a dozen people and there's like maybe 30, 40 people there to see that, or maybe more, you know, depending on the setup and all that stuff. And you're going in and you're driven and you're tired and, you know, didn't have time to put fresh strings on your guitar and didn't sleep more than 3 hours the night before and all that stuff because by the time you packed up at the last club, you know, it was closing time and all that. And going, you know, I'm the type of guy that like a 10 or 15 minute warm up for my fingers will make them 100% more nimble than they were before.
Really?
You know, when I just freshly unwrap them from around the steering wheel for 6 hours, right? It takes me
That's
15
true.
minutes to loosen them up a little bit, but if I don't get that, if I have to start playing right off the bat cold, you know, it can take a couple of tunes to really get there. And, how do we get on that subject?
Legends that,
Oh, well,
that
you
have
know,
played
so,
the same stage.
right. And so it goes to like confidence in performances, right? Like, you know, and lately I've been really disciplined about putting 3 or 4 hours of playing in, you know. I know that sounds excessive, but I'm doing other stuff while I'm doing it also. Like I've learned to multitask and be able to do some small office work while I'm
Right.
working on, you know, running through material and stuff like that. And at any rate, going on stage and keeping your confidence together, projecting that, you can complicate it if you start thinking about like, well, Ray Charles played on this stage, or, you know, I mean, Husker, like I was in Minneapolis the other night, and, you know, like Husker Du or somebody,
Right.
like the Replacements played here, and it's a rock club, and I don't have a band, I'm just a solo guy right now, because it's expensive to drag my band around all over the country, so I come out and do solo shows, and hopefully if it starts catching in a market, like Clinton, you know, I can start thinking and talking to people who are interested in bringing the band, and then I
Right,
can bring
right.
the rock and roll show up here. But for now, it's a solo kind of a thing, and I try not to think about the greats having played in those same rooms, because then I get a little bit like nervous.
Do ya? Yeah,
It might take
I
me
guess-
longer to hit my stride.
I guess, yeah, I can see that. You know, another song that I really liked on yours, by the way, you said you got into blues, but I hear elements of blues, folk, jazz, ragtime. I hear everything mixed into your music. So is that something you think about when you're writing, or that just happens that way?
My writing usually stems from like a random melodic figure floating around in my imagination when I'm walking to the grocery store or doing my laundry or something like that, and I start to hear just like that. Or I'm feeling something really, some grief, feeling some loneliness or some grief or some isolation, some hopelessness, some challenge, or some intense emotion will invariably bring a melody, just like a scrap, not even a complete melody, a few notes, a cluster of a few notes, and then, you know, I build on that, and generally, the lyrical, it might come with a few words, and then that's the beginning seed of a song that I build around. And, you know, so as far as like, what I'm thinking about when I'm writing songs, I generally try to relate my thoughts that have brought me this little scrap of a melody that triggered this emotion response that has triggered a melody in my head. If I've got something like that happen, I try and remember what it, you know, connect it, sew it together with the actual event that triggered that emotion, you know, and try and sort of connect the dots, and then the song starts to come into view from there, you know, like that. That's how my process works. So there's not a lot of preconceived notions about how it's going to go. Although I have been thinking lately that I need to write a whole lot more party songs. So you know, I think about that a lot.
Okay, one thing I was gonna say, Do you remember what you were thinking about when Poison River came into your mind?
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah. My community had gotten into a bit of a fracas with an oil company, a pipeline operator, had informed us that we were in the path of their new project or infrastructure project, and we had 30 days to comment, but we really couldn't prevent them from doing what they wanted, and there was really no point, and blah, blah, blah. And our community, it was in 2015, 2016, right in there, the last couple of years of the Obama administration, and I live in a very conservative community north of Nashville called Jolton and Whites Creek. Jolton is the community that was facing this pipeline compressor station expansion, and one of the biggest compressor stations in the country was to be built there, as if a whole fleet of jumbo jets would be just in perpetuity sitting there burning their engines. And so people from both sides, I mean, we speak in these terms of duality in the United States, but really there's a wide diversity of worldviews and political positions in America. Unfortunately, we have simplified and overly simplified the nuances in our political life to be this binary thing that you're either red or blue, or you're either left or right, or whatever like that. And there's very little kind of an ability for us to compromise, etc. But at that moment in history, and 2015 was before the great fissure opened up, the really most recent one, in our history as a nation. And to my surprise, people from the right, the very conservative end of the spectrum, and from the left, and from all points in between, agreed on the idea that our community should not be subject to the whims of a pipeline operator and a big polluter, and we shouldn't just have no say in the matter, and that the kiddies shouldn't have to run around in creeks with these corroded 32-inch pipelines with 750 pound per square inch of pressure and highly volatile and explosive materials inside, without those pipelines looking really, really much better than they looked. In 2015, they were in decrepit condition. I can tell you, I photographed them and submitted my findings to regulators at all levels to show that this company should not be given the permits that they were asking for. At any rate, the beautiful part of that moment was that we were really able to come together as a community from left and right under the idea of sticking up for ourselves and as a community. That, inclusive, there was a place for everybody at the table. Nobody was shut out of the conversation. Nobody showed up to say, well, because of course there was no jobs coming for our community. They were bringing their own people from Texas.
Right.
They were gonna, there might be some hotel, arrangements that would benefit the hotel operator in Jolton or whatever, but they were bringing their own people to do all this work. There was really very little benefit for us. There wasn't any constituency that showed up at any of the public hearings saying, we want the pipeline infrastructure expansion. We want our air quality impacted in this negative way and with this whole spectrum of toxic chemicals, and we want our pipelines to be subject to reverse flow and higher internal pressures. Nobody showed up to say that. We were unified, left and right.
And that is wonderful. I wish there was more of that, where everybody got together and got on the same page and said, hey, you gotta stop this. That's how it used to be.
Yes.
Everybody would work together on things.
We have got to get back to the garden, my friend.
Yes, for sure. For sure. You got time for maybe another song? So you want to do something?
Yeah, I guess, since we talked about it, how about Poison Rivers?
All right.
I mean, I'm going to be playing some slide guitar tonight, guys. I'm going to be playing some electric guitar tonight. I got a keyboard set up down there. I do some piano tunes, some stride and blues piano and that kind of stuff. So I don't want you to think I'm just down there strumming an acoustic guitar, right? So, Poison Rivers. This is my song from the big pipeline fight that we undertook, and this song sort of became a little bit of a rallying cry for my community.
Cool.
Some would try to buy the ocean, and some would try to buy the sea, and sell it back to make their fortune off of little folks like you and me. They have long kept us divided by the many ways we disagree. And we ourselves have been misguided in our struggle to be free. I don't want their poison rivers, and I don't want their barren fields. And the more they try to push them on me, the more that I refuse to yield. Some would rather that we never come together in the fray, but come and sit by my campfire. We don't need them anyway. I don't want their poison rivers, I don't want their barren fields. And the more they try to push them on me, the more that I refuse to yield. I believe the day is coming when decent folk will speak as one. May it be soon, for time's a-wasting, and there is much left to be done. I don't want their poison rivers, and I don't want their barren fields. And the more they try to push them on me, the more that I refuse to yield. And the more they try to push them on me, the more that I refuse to yield.
Oh, yeah. That's good stuff, people. That's good stuff. Mike Younger, live in the KMCN studio on Midwest Revue Live. Mac FM, just in case you're wondering. All right, Mike, thank you for being here, man.
Billy Rose, it's always an honor to be here on the air with you. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate it. And by the way, you can head down to the View in downtown Clinton right now. You can catch Mike's show 2 hours or hour.
We're going to start around 7:38 or something like that.
Okay.
Not too long from now. I got to get over there rather quickly after.
So he's going to be running out the door here.
So, you know, I probably won't hit it till 8 o'clock.
All right. All right, go check him out. He's definitely worth seeing and hearing. It's good stuff, man.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Midwest Revue Live on Mac FM 94.7.
That was fun.
Mac 94.7
That was a good one, man.
KLCN,
Yeah.
Clinton, Iowa.
It was-
A Gendro Broadcasting
I didn't
Station.
get a little verbose, but I was at least, I remembered where I was most of the time.
Yeah, that was fun.
Declare your independence. Too much on your next new